He came from a world where fire was not feared, but mastered. A god among warriors, born not from prophecy but from agony, cast in chains and flame, rising again and again. Vulkan, the Primarch who could not die, who chose mercy over madness and wielded strength as a shield, not a sword, and now he faces a monster who knew no such restraint. Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, a slayer of gods, a soul scorched clean by vengeance, then reshaped by fatherhood, loss, and rage anew. The blades at his back whisper with the screams of pantheons. The scars on his body are maps of apocalypse. And across the stars, the galaxy watches as two fireborn titans walk toward each other beneath the dying sun of a burning world. This is not a duel of victory. This is not a contest of dominance. This is a test of belief, of who deserves to wield power, and who must be broken beneath it. In a galaxy ruled by gods and monsters, your voice matters. If stories like this ignite your imagination, if you crave more of these impossible collisions between universes, join us. Subscribe, like, and share this with fellow warriors of lore. Let your voice echo across Terra and beyond. The next reckoning could be written by you. He woke to the sound of cracking stone, a continent exhaling beneath his feet. Vulkan opened his eyes to a sky that did not belong to him. It burned red and black like iron in mid-forging, clouds torn apart by heat lightning that never touched the ground. He could feel the air's weight, dense with ash, oily and thick like the breath of an underworld forge. Every inhalation stung, yet it was familiar, too familiar. He was standing on a plain of obsidian glass, still steaming from ages of volcanic torment, the world shifting as if it resented his presence. He remembered Nocturne, his home, its violent seasons and oceans of magma, and for an instant thought he had returned. But this was not Nocturne. There were no drakes circling the horizon, no light of the 9 suns, only silence. The Emperor's presence was gone. That was the first and most terrible realization. His mind, built for calculation and war, tried to find order. A breach in the warp? An ancient weapon? He flexed his gauntlets and felt the hum of the power coils, still intact. Dawnbringer, his warhammer, lay a few meters away, half buried in glass and dust. He stepped toward it, each movement echoing like thunder. When he gripped its haft, the weapon's machine spirit stirred, confused, questioning. No signal, Vulkan murmured under his breath, though his vox link was silent. No relay, no vox, no emperor. He knelt for a moment, resting the hammer beside him, and lowered his head. There were no prayers left in him, only habit. The old motions, the weight of centuries burned into ritual. His armor's vents hissed as molten air flowed around him, and he whispered into the silence. If I am exiled again, Father, let it be for a reason. There was no answer, not from the warp, not from the heavens, but the ground did tremble. He looked up. On the far ridge, a figure was standing, distant, framed by the red horizon, broad-shouldered, unmoving like a statue carved from shadow. Vulkan's enhanced sight magnified it. A man, bare-armed, holding 2 strange curved blades chained to his forearms. The man's skin was pale, scarred, and marked by swirling tattoos of crimson. His eyes burned faintly, not with psychic light, but with something older, something human and divine in the same breath. The Forge Father's instincts whispered danger, not demonic, not Xenos, not machine. Something else, something that should not exist here. Vulkan rose to his full height, towering like a living mountain. The obsidian plane hissed beneath his weight as molten cracks began to spiderweb outward. His voice, when he spoke, rolled like thunder over the wind. Identify yourself! The stranger did not move. The red chains along his arms rattled softly as the wind shifted. Then, slowly, he began to walk down from the ridge, each step deliberate, measured like a predator assessing prey. Vulkan felt the psychic void around him stir, a tremor in the ether. This world had no warp resonance, no echo of the Astronomicon. And yet this man, this warrior, walked as if power radiated from his every breath. As the distance closed, Vulkan saw the weapons in full, two curved blades etched with runes older than any human tongue. The metal glowed faintly as though remembering every god it had slain. The Forge Father's hands tightened around Dawnbringer. "I said identify yourself." The stranger stopped. For a moment, the two simply looked at each other, the Primarch of Fire and the Ghost of Sparta, neither understanding what the other truly was, but both recognizing the weight of the other's existence. Then the man spoke, voice low and ancient, the syllables thick with years of rage and regret. "I am Kratos, son of no god, breaker of Olympus. I do not kneel." The words carried no arrogance, only truth. Vulkan's eyes narrowed. The name meant nothing to him, yet the weight behind it was real. It vibrated in the air, resonant, like a hammer striking divine metal. "You speak as one of the lost gods," Vulkan said, his tone edged with warning. "But this is not your realm. You stand on the world of man." Kratos glanced at the land, at the molten rivers and the shifting black glass. His jaw tightened. "This is no world of man. I have seen your kind. Gods who burn worlds and call it creation. I am not here to bow to another." The last sentence cut the air like a blade. Vulkan's instincts flared. This was no demon or fool. This was a warrior of godlike magnitude, and something in the air between them began to warp, unseen but undeniable. The plane around them quivered as the two titans' energies met, colliding invisibly like tectonic plates. Dawnbringer's runes pulsed. The blades of chaos flickered to life. Neither moved. Not yet. But the very world began to change in anticipation. The wind howled across the plain. Molten geysers erupted from fractures. The ground began to shimmer as if reality itself were bracing for the collision. Vulkan spoke first. "If you seek war, stranger, you will find it." Kratos' reply was a whisper, but it carried like thunder. "I seek only what I was denied." And then the first motion, a blur of red and gold. The hammer rose, the chains cracked, and the Forge Father and the God of War collided beneath the bleeding sky. The impact sounded like the birth of a star. The plane shattered. The horizon bent. Flame and lightning fused into a storm of blinding brilliance. And in the silence that followed, only the sound of two titans breathing remained. The beginning of a legend the galaxy itself would one day try to forget. It wasn't just a duel. It was tectonic memory unspooling through steel and flame. When Vulkan struck, the obsidian plane fractured beneath his feet, 1,000 cracks racing outward like lightning caught in stone. Dawnbringer swung in an arc that could fell titans, the air itself parting with a groan of protest. But Kratos was gone, not moved, vanished. A blur of rage and reflex, ducking under the strike and launching upward. The blades of chaos trailing fire behind him like a comet's tail. They clashed mid-air. Sparks erupted, but these weren't the embers of a forge. They were memories of gods dying. The chains wrapped around Vulkan's bracer, Kratos pulling himself in, fist raised. He struck the Primarch's jaw, a blow that would have pulverized ceramite, but Vulkan only staggered. Flames rippled across his face, and in that moment he smiled. "You burn like Nocturne," he said, grabbing Kratos mid-air and hurling him into the glass mountains. The impact flattened an entire ridge. Kratos didn't cry out. He didn't scream. He rose, breathing hard, his muscles twitching under the weight of combat's language. His eyes narrowed. "You're not like the others," he muttered. "And you," Vulkan stepped forward, each stride cratering the earth, "have never fought one born of flame and loyalty both." Kratos raised his blades again, and the chains snapped with eager hunger. "I've killed titans, and I've buried gods." They charged. This time the world reacted first. The glass plane detonated upward in spikes as both titans met at full velocity. Kratos ducked under a hammer swing and swept his chains across Vulkan's greaves, sparks flying, ceramite groaning. Vulkan roared, his free hand grabbing the chain, yanking the ghost of Sparta forward like prey into flume. He brought the hammer down again, but Kratos raised both blades, crossed them, and caught it. The shockwave flattened every mountain for kilometers. They stood locked together, fury against discipline, vengeance against purpose. Kratos' arms trembled, his boots carving trenches in the glass. Vulkan leaned in, eyes blazing like twin suns, pressing down with weight forged across 10,000 battlefields. Then the blades of chaos screamed. A surge of raw chaos fire burst from them, not psychic, not warp-born, but something else. Something primal. The backlash sent Vulkan flying, his massive form smashing through cliffs until he skidded to a halt, molten glass hissing around him. Kratos fell to one knee, panting, chains coiling like serpents around his wrists. Vulkan stood again, slower this time. His armor was scorched, the right pauldron dented, but his eyes were steady. He planted Dawnbringer in the earth and looked at Kratos not as an enemy but as a question. "You were not made by the warp," he said quietly. "No. You're not of Terra. No. And yet you burn with fury that rivals demons." Kratos said nothing. Vulkan's gaze narrowed. "Then where are you from?" The wind howled, as if it wished not to hear the answer. Kratos finally spoke. "A place that destroyed itself. A world where gods ruled and men suffered. I ended it." Vulkan stared at him, trying to understand. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. Centuries of blood, of betrayal, of the impossible made flesh. In that moment he saw not an invader, but a refugee of war on a scale even a Primarch could not easily imagine. And beneath it all, shame. "You carry guilt," Vulkan said. Kratos stood. "I carry truth. You'll learn that before the end." There was no boasting in his tone, only prophecy. And then the sky screamed. Above them, the clouds that had burned for hours parted. Not by wind, not by storm, by will. Golden light, sick with memory and static, began to bleed through the cracks in the red heavens. Symbols unknowable yet familiar flared across the firmament. The imperial Aquila etched in reverse. The face of the emperor blurred and refracted as if remembered through tears, the sound of 1,000 warriors chanting in reverse. Vulkan turned his head upward. "That is no storm." "No," Kratos whispered. "That's fate trying to remember itself." The warp was watching, or perhaps something deeper, something buried even beneath the immaterium, where broken timelines cry out in silence, where unchosen paths echo like ghosts. Vulkan raised his hammer once more. "We must end this now, before this world remembers too much." Kratos nodded, but there was sadness in his eyes. "It never forgets. It only waits." And the third clash began. No words, no pretense, just fury. Hammer met blade, chain met armored fist. The ground shattered, then tried to rebuild itself. With every blow, time fractured. Visions bled into the edges, worlds that never were, a nocturne without fire, an Olympus where Kratos never killed, a Terra where the Primarchs never returned. Each blow carved history, each strike was myth rejecting silence. And as the battle reached its crescendo, one thought burned in both warriors' minds. There are no gods here, only judgment. The wounds were not physical. as the echoes of their last strike trembled through the fractured plain. Both warriors stood still, breathing heavy, not from exhaustion, but from realization. The battlefield was quiet, too quiet. The wind had stopped. The fires receded as though afraid. Even the warp's twisted light above dimmed slightly as if caught in suspense. Kratos tightened the grip on his blades, but his gaze wasn't on Vulkan. It was inward, a flicker, a whisper not his own. He blinked, and for a moment the glass beneath his feet was gone, replaced by bloodied marble and crumbling stone pillars. Olympus, not as it had fallen, but as it had never been. Whole, peaceful, still crowned in clouds, untouched by wrath. He blinked again, and he was back. Across from him, Vulkan lowered Dawnbringer slightly. "I saw it too," the Primarch murmured. Kratos said nothing, but his jaw clenched. It wasn't memory. It wasn't illusion. It was possibility. This world, or this cursed graveyard of empires, had shown them fragments of what could have been. The warp did not dream. It remembered dreams that had died. The silence cracked. From beneath the plain, a low rumble started. Not the tremor of tectonics, but the groan of metal. Deep, ancient, buried. Both turned instinctively as, from below, a shape began to rise. It wasn't a creature. It was a door. Massive, blackened by age and flame, flanked by weathered aquilii and gold-trimmed glyphs that glowed faintly. Not in reverence, but warning. Vault Primaris 009. Watchfire Protocol Vulkan stepped back in disbelief. That vault was sealed before the heresy, only the Emperor's voice. But the door was opening. No key, no code, only presence. Kratos looked at it without awe, only recognition. "It calls," he said. Vulkan turned to him. "How could it know you?" Kratos' expression hardened. "Because it remembers war." The doorway yawned open, no light, just shadow, thick as oil. But from within came the faintest pulse, a beat, slow, thunderous, echoing, not mechanical, a heartbeat. Vulkan gripped his hammer tighter. "We should not go in." Kratos was already walking forward. "You don't have a choice." And he was right. As his foot crossed the threshold, the shadows did not consume him. They parted like a memory letting go. Vulkan hesitated for the first time in centuries, then followed. The descent was steep, a spiral of black stone veins etched with symbols long erased from imperial records. The deeper they went, the heavier it felt. Not the air, but time itself. Like every step down pressed years into their bones. Kratos moved with grim familiarity, Vulkan with reverence. Then they reached it. A chamber, not vast, intimate. Circular. At its center, a cradle of iron surrounded by a ring of shattered armor pieces, gold, red, black, and all scorched beyond recognition. And atop the cradle, a body, small, human, sleeping. Kratos approached it like one who had found the end of a riddle. Vulkan whispered, "Who is this?" But he already knew the answer. "It's the boy," Kratos said. "What boy?" "The one I tried to save." He knelt. The child lay still, no older than 10, his features blurred by stasis shimmer, as if memory itself couldn't decide which timeline he belonged to. But around his brow was a faint silver circlet, and on his chest, resting gently, a shard of something that pulsed like a star's dying breath. Not Xenos. Not chaos, not divine, just potential. Vulkan stepped closer. "Why is he here? This is Imperial Sanctum. How did he—" Kratos didn't move. "He doesn't belong to your Imperium. He doesn't belong to mine. He belongs to all that was lost." Outside, thunder rolled. The vault was reacting. The boy stirred. just once, and across Terra, alarms screamed in places that had not heard noise in 10,000 years. Vox channels burst with static. In the Inquisition's hidden towers, agents fell to their knees in pain as visions bled through their minds. Visions of fire, of ghosts, of a burning tree that never grew. The Emperor felt it, not as sensation, not as data, but as grief. Back inside the vault, Kratos stood again. "We woke something," Vulkan said. "No," Kratos replied. "We reminded it." The vault shook. Above, the warp recoiled. Because the child was not a threat, he was a question, a wound across time that never healed, and two warriors, born of fire and vengeance, had reopened it. Outside, battle shouts returned. The world resumed motion. But nothing would be the same. Not now. Not after they remembered the boy. Vulkan looked at Kratos. "What now?" The ghost of Sparta turned, face carved from stone. "We finish this. Or the warp will." And they began the climb back to the surface, but behind them, in the stillness of the vault, the child exhaled. Just once, and the flame on his chest pulsed stronger. The great engines beneath Terra thrummed with restless anticipation. But far above the vault, above even the towers of the Inquisition and the obsidian vaults of the Sisters of Silence, the golden throne of the Imperium remained unmoving. And yet something had changed. The custodian guards stationed at the Eternity Gate stood still, their halberds held with mathematical precision. Their golden armor reflected the distant starlight bleeding through the adamantium vault above the Imperial Palace. Yet none of them looked skyward. They didn't need to. They had felt it the moment the vault below breathed. They didn't speak. They didn't react. But every single custodes shifted, internally recalibrated. The throne's shadow had twitched. Somewhere within the master of mankind, if he could still be called such. A memory stirred, not awakened, not relived, but examined. It was not the presence of Kratos that drew it, nor even the child, though that shard of unmade fate called out like a beacon to old wars forgotten. It was possibility, a fragment of causality that had been long buried, something that should never have reached Terra, something older than the Imperium and yet tied to its most central lie. He had not moved, he had not spoken, but he had noticed. The Astronomicon pulsed with a faint hiccup, not a failure but a shift in alignment, as though the light of a billion psychers momentarily reflected not outward but inward. Vulkan, reaching the upper vault steps, felt it in his bones. He turned, not to Kratos but to the heavens. "That wasn't you," he said quietly. Kratos said nothing. The ghost of Sparta stood as he always had, resolute, brutal, unreadable, but his face was angled upward now, his eyes fixed not on the horizon but on the highest peak of the Imperial Palace, the invisible place where the Emperor was entombed in eternity. Vulkan breathed, almost reverently. "You woke something," he buried. Kratos' voice was a graveled growl. Then he buried it poorly. A moment passed. Then came the sound, not thunder, not warp, not war, but movement. All across the continent-spanning palace, systems long dormant came to life. Vaults sealed for millennia hissed open, servo sensors flared. Even the Mechanicus engines that fed the throne's neural network buzzed as though re-encountering old code. And across the throne world, dreams shifted. The people of Terra did not understand why they wept that night, why dreams of forests, of strange weapons, of a boy with a star in his chest haunted them. But in the fortress monastery of the Grey Knights, librarians woke screaming, because the warp was listening, and it did not like what it heard. Kratos turned to Vulkan. "You said he doesn't speak." "He doesn't. But he watches. Yes. Kratos stared at the sky. Then he heard me. The Primarch said nothing. Instead, his gaze drifted to the distant spires, the broken ones, where once sons of the Emperor had marched. Guilliman had passed those halls recently. But this was older. This was not a war to be fought. It was a revelation to endure. We cannot stay here, Vulkan said. Whatever we found, it is not done. No, Kratos answered. It is only beginning. Then the ground beneath their feet began to change, not crumble, transform, stone blackened, becoming smooth like volcanic obsidian. Etchings began to rise from it. Glyphs, runes, fragments of both Olympian prophecy and Terran liturgy, words that had no translation and only meaning. And in that moment, Kratos understood something that had escaped even gods. This world, this galaxy, did not fear power. It feared remembrance. And he was a relic of everything the Imperium wanted to forget. A living blade made from grief, vengeance, and defiance. Vulkan looked around them. We can't stay in the open. Eyes are coming. Kratos nodded once. Let them come. And far above, the Emperor's eyes, or perhaps what remained of them, narrowed. Not in anger, in calculation. For the first time in 10,000 years, something had occurred outside the script. The warp had not predicted it. The gods had not authored it. Even Malkador, wherever his echoes resided, had not whispered of this. Kratos, the boy. The vault, a weapon older than prophecy. And a war not yet named. In the quiet of the throne, no voice rang out. But to those attuned to the psychic tides of the Imperium, something unfathomable stirred. Not a word, not a command, but a single terrible concept projected like a blade of thought across the Imperium. Prepare. And across the galaxy, unseen by both warriors standing atop Terra's scars, factions moved. The Inquisition opened new black files. The black ships changed course, and in a forgotten vault beneath Mars, a red-robed tech priest uttered a rite of activation for a project once deemed too dangerous even for the Omnissiah's blessing. But back atop the fractured plane, Kratos and Vulkan stood alone, the first pieces placed upon a board that had no name. Not yet, but soon. Because the throne's shadow had remembered something it tried to forget, and now, the rest of the galaxy would have to remember too. The boy's scream cracked the air. It was not loud, not even vocalized, but it split the fabric of what the Mechanicus would call reality. Terra's crust shook, not with seismic violence, but with metaphysical resistance. A scream not made of sound, but of meaning. A declaration of pain, survival, and something older than even language. Kratos was at the boy's side instantly, catching him as his knees buckled. His gauntlet gripped the child's arm. And instantly his vision drowned in fire, not physical, not psychic, primordial. Images flooded his mind as though the boy's presence was a key, unlocking something Kratos had unknowingly carried. He saw flames, yes, but not Terran Prometheum, a different flame. The kind that judges, that burns sin that is neither alive nor dead. He saw a mountain, saw a child forged in blood and prophecy, saw a blade carved from regret. He saw a mirror, and then he saw the warp. No longer distant, no longer silent, it had noticed them now. Fully, the boy's back arched as something within him ruptured. Not physically, his soul. A fracture was spreading across it like a spiderweb of impossible energy. He glowed. Not gold, not violet, but deep red and bone white, the colors of two worlds colliding. Vulkan was already speaking rites. He pressed a gauntleted hand to the boy's chest and intoned lines of old Nocturnian cant. Not sorcery, not psychic ritual, but a language of calming, of containment. Kratos could only watch. His hands, the same hands that had broken titans, slain gods, destroyed pantheons, could do nothing. And for the first time in 1,000 years, he felt helpless. The warp surged around them now. It didn't lash out, not yet, but it had taken notice. And from that attention came something worse than any demon: recognition. Somewhere across the immaterium, entities born of nightmare whispered ancient names, not of Kratos, not of Vulkan, but of what the boy carried, a concept once sealed away by the Emperor himself. Not chaos, not order, but choice. The boy's power was not warp sorcery. It was not psychic combustion. It was the raw potential of a will unshaped, a will that had brushed the god machine and not been destroyed. And that terrified both gods and men. Vulkan's voice grew louder. The ground beneath them fractured again, this time spewing no lava, but memory, a psychic echo encoded into the bones of Terra itself. Voices of old custodies, fragments of the Sisters of Silence, even the laughter of the Emperor's own gene laboratories. The past was bleeding through. Kratos stood, shielded the boy with his body, and raised the blades of chaos high. He wasn't waiting anymore. "Vulkan!" The Primarch didn't stop chanting. "Say it!" "Where is safe?" Vulkan's eyes burned. "Nowhere is safe. Not now." "Then where do we make our stand?" There was no hesitation. The depository of binding, deep beneath the palace, old as unity. "Will he let us in?" Vulkan looked at the throne. "He already has." And then came the clash. The sky above split, not with ships or fire, but with presence. Entities began descending. Not demons, not men, but those who walk between. The choirs of the null, blank-faced horrors. Remnants of failed psychic experiments once sealed away by Malkador, now loosed by the warp's disruption. They did not scream. They did not fly. They descended, walking through sky as if it were glass, heads tilted in mockery of faith. Kratos stepped forward, twin blades igniting. The chains rattled, not in fear, but in hunger. The Primarch called, "Go!" Kratos did not argue. He scooped the child up, slung him across his shoulder like a battlefield brother, and ran. Vulkan turned. He did not run. He stood, and as the first of the null choirs reached him, he raised his hammer. Dracothion's fang pulsed once, and Terra remembered fire. It was not the fire of war. It was wrath, divine, measured, a son of the Emperor at war with the broken toys of the warp. Far below, Kratos descended into the ancient tunnels, each step shaking loose dust untouched since the Unification Wars. The path bent around him, not in architecture but in tension. Doors opened not by key or right, but by recognition. The vault was calling him deeper. Behind him, echoes of war shook the mountain. He did not slow. He did not stumble, but the boy whispered in his arms, voice thin and not his own, "He is not what you think." Kratos narrowed his eyes. "The Emperor?" "No." Vulkan A beat past, then, "None of them are." Kratos said nothing, but his grip on the blades tightened. The past was waking, and not all of it was friendly. The steps descended endlessly, carved into obsidian, reinforced with adamantium veins that shimmered under flame-etched symbols. The passageway spiraled not through stone, but through memory. Kratos knew tunnels. He had bled through labyrinths of Olympus and Midgard alike. But this was different. The tunnel did not resist him. It recognized him. With every step, the walls pulsed, dimly at first, like the flicker of a heartbeat long dormant, then brighter. Glyphs once hidden beneath 10,000 years of ash and silence began to glow, not with warp energy, but with something older. Intent. He descended not alone. On his shoulder, the boy was silent now. not unconscious but contained, folded into a state of half-reality that Kratos could feel pulsing like a second heart. His skin was no longer normal flesh. Patterns moved beneath it. Not tattoos, not scars, but shifting runes that seemed to rewrite themselves based on proximity to ancient seals carved into the tunnel's throat. Then came the first gate. 10 meters tall, shaped like a downward-pointing blade buried in basalt. The door was sealed with 3 sigils. The central one pulsed when Kratos stepped forward. A voice, ancient, mechanical, genderless, whispered from the rock itself. State designation. Kratos did not answer. The boy did. Shardborn. Unnamed. The sigil accepted the name. The first gate opened not with grinding gears, but with a sigh. A release of tension older than the Horus heresy. And then, stillness. The chamber beyond was wide, domed like a hollowed skull. No columns, no statues, just a central dais, circular and inset with radiant lines that did not glow. They waited. Kratos stepped onto the platform. The walls responded, not violently, not with defense, with welcoming. One by one, images flickered into existence, not holograms, not warp ghosts, but something in between, echoes of figures long since erased, Primarchs in moments of truth, custodes kneeling beside shattered staves, saints dying with smiles. One image showed the Emperor, but not on the throne. He stood, tall, silent, watching a forge burn. Kratos turned to the boy. "What is this place?" The boy looked up, his eyes glowing now with a mirrored fire. Before the legions, before the Great Crusade, before even unity, this was where he tested what would come. Kratos frowned. "Weapons?" The boy shook his head. "No, wills the dais pulsed beneath them, lines traced around their feet, not circuitry, not warp sigils, but something deeper, choices. And then, finally, a whisper. Not from the room, but from within Kratos. "You are not of this galaxy." He did not flinch. "You are not of this war." Still, he stood. "You have killed gods." His grip tightened. "Will you kneel before one more?" Kratos answered with silence, a silence louder than any scream. The platform responded. It did not rise. It did not open. It bent. Reality curved. Not space, but narrative. Time lost sequence. The room did not change, but its meaning did. They were now not merely in a vault, but in the echo of a choice not yet made. A figure emerged, not walking, becoming. Wreathed in flame, but not destructive. Shaped like a man, but with features that shifted based on how one looked. Some might see a robed saint, others a god machine. Kratos saw something else. A man in chains. The apparition spoke without sound. "This is the place of weighing. You may leave if you choose, or you may look upon what the child may become." Kratos stepped forward. The figure nodded, and the room tore open, not physically, metaphysically. The walls split, revealing possibilities, not futures, not certainties, reflections of what might be. One showed the boy grown, armored in gold and crimson, leading armies with a gaze that unraveled lies. Another showed him shackled, crowned with a circuit halo, singing data prayers into a throne that fed on his soul. A third showed Terra burning, the boy's face impassive as Titans knelt before him. Kratos stepped back. "These are lies." The flame shape regarded him. "No, these are choices," the boy spoke, barely audible. "I don't want this." Kratos knelt beside him. "You do not have to want it. You only must choose who you are before others choose for you." The image flickered. The chamber responded. "And you, God-killer," the voice asked, "will you shape him or use him?" Kratos did not answer with words. He raised the blades of chaos and cast them down. They hit the stone with a scream, not a metallic clang, but a psychic recoil. He turned his back on them. "I will teach him to wield himself." Not blades, not prophecy, just will. The chamber pulsed once more, accepted. A final door opened. Through it, darkness. Not void. Shadow. And in that shadow, another voice. Vulkan, faint, bleeding, still alive. Kratos! The boy turned to him, eyes wide. He's still fighting. Kratos lifted the child. Then we go! As they entered the corridor, the chamber behind them began to fade, not collapse, not vanish, sleep until the next who dares to defy fate. They emerged into firelight, not Prometheum. Something older, something cleaner, like the forges of pre-unification Terran kindreds, where flame was still sacred and not just functional. The shadows here were sharper. They clung to angles that defied rational geometry, wrapping around the arches and braziers like smoke caught mid-prayer. And there, in the center of the chamber, lay Vulkan. No throne, no dais, just stone. Cracked beneath his mass, blackened where heat had bled from his broken armor. He was on one knee, gauntleted hands pressed to the ground, not in submission, but as though holding something beneath the floor from rising. His skin, obsidian fractured with veins of fire, shimmered. His breath came slow, not from exhaustion, from control. Like a volcano holding itself still, daring the mountain above not to collapse. Kratos approached, silent. The boy beside him paused. Instinct or memory, it was unclear. But he clutched Kratos' forearm like it was the last anchor to self. Vulkan raised his head. His eyes were not open, but they saw. Kratos spoke first. "You held them off!" Vulkan's voice was ash wrapped in gravity. "They wanted him. I gave them me." He coughed, and when he did, steam hissed from the rents in his throat guard. "They sent a choir." The word choir did not belong in this place. Kratos frowned. "Demons?" Vulkan shook his head. "No, worse." He raised one arm, slow, trembling but unstoppable, and pointed behind him. There, suspended in a weave of gold-threaded pylons and psychic lattice, hung figures, not bodies, not living, something between. They were robed, cloaked in light, not radiance but certainty. Each of their faces bore the same expression, tranquil cruelty, and each of their mouths hung open in eternal song. But no sound emerged, only pressure, a hum just beneath perception. Not music, doctrine. The choir was bound, but not silenced. Their influence was passive now, like gravity, oppressive, shaping the mood, the thoughts, the edges of every choice. The boy flinched. Kratos turned to Vulkan. "What are they?" Vulkan stood fully now. His stature dwarfed even Kratos, and though he bled light from a dozen wounds, his spine did not bend. They were once human. Now they are doctrine engines. Kratos didn't speak. Vulkan explained quietly with the weight of memory. They sing truths into being. Not with sorcery, with consensus, with belief. What they sing, others think. What others think, others do. The boy whispered, "That's how they infected the legions." Vulkan nodded. Not with claws, with certainty. One of the figures twitched, just once, and the chamber shuddered. Kratos stepped forward. "What do they want?" Vulkan did not blink. "Obedience." And then, from above, a voice cut through, clear, female, not cruel, confident. "They want order. Harmony, continuity." From a platform above, descending on a bridge of steel and thought, came a figure clad in green, not chaos-warped, not corrupted, but perfectly aligned, like every movement had been calculated 1,000 times before being made. Kratos turned, instinct pulling blades to his fists. The woman did not flinch. "You misunderstand the choir. They do not command, they inspire. They sing the notes the galaxy has already chosen to hear." Vulkan growled. "You are of the choir?" She smiled softly. "I am their custodian." A voice between volumes, Kratos stepped forward. "And what are you to the boy?" She looked at him, and for the first time her composure fractured. A flicker, a moment. The final key, Vulkan's gauntlet, ignited. "Not while I breathe." She did not move. "You mistake my purpose, Vulkan. I do not seek to kill. I seek to merge." The chamber shifted. Behind her, the choir pulsed, just once. A ripple of light synchronized across every face, and suddenly, Kratos felt it. A thought not his own, a desire not born from him. Lay down the blades, just for a moment, but he gritted his teeth and spat blood. "No," the woman sighed. "A shame. Free will is so messy." Vulkan stepped forward, massive, burning, unbowed. "You talk of will. Let's see how it stands against fire." And he charged. The platform ignited. The chamber screamed. Kratos followed. The custodian lifted a hand, not in defense but in command. The choir surged, not with sound, with influence. Suddenly the floor wasn't stone. It was memory. Kratos was back in Olympus, in Helheim, holding his wife's ashes, failing his brother, failing his son. But he kept moving, because that was the difference. He remembered. But he did not stop. The boy behind them screamed, but not in pain, in denial. "No more lies!" And from his hands fire leapt, not warp, not sorcery, intent. It struck the choir like a blade of dawn. And for a moment one voice faltered. One song cracked, and in that silence Vulkan reached the custodian. His fist met her shield. Light and fire collided, reality buckled. But for that instant, just that one sliver of defiance, the room was no longer singing. It was listening. There are silences that scream, louder than war horns. In the wake of that singular moment, when the choir faltered and Vulkan's hammer met the custodian's shield, the chamber did not settle. It recoiled, as if reality itself had stretched too far to contain the will of those still willing to disobey. Kratos landed hard, shoulder first, dragging furrows through the broken stone, his blades of chaos scarring the floor as they slowed his momentum. Vulkan stumbled, massive shoulders heaving, eyes flickering with internal fire as he righted himself. The custodian stood amid the aftermath, her shield arm now fractured at the elbow, green robe scorched, but her face unchanged, not pained, not shocked, disappointed. "You confuse resistance for wisdom," she said softly, like a mother scolding a stubborn child. "The song was never for you." "It was for what comes after." Kratos spat at her feet. "Then let it come." But the custodian didn't respond. She turned. The choir shimmered again, their mouths still unmoving, yet something shifted. Kratos felt it in his spine, like a wire being threaded through his marrow. His thoughts bent, not broken but weighted. The boy behind him cried out, collapsing to his knees, clutching his skull. Vulkan moved to help, but his legs stiffened as if the stone had risen to trap him. "They've changed their pitch," Vulkan growled. "Not influence now." Extraction. Kratos staggered forward. "What are they pulling?" The custodian didn't answer with words. Instead, the choir's power manifested, not in violence, but in memory. From the walls, figures emerged, not physical, but real. Holograms made of will and resonance. The boy's father, Kratos' brother, Vulkan's fallen sons. They spoke nothing, they just stared, accusation and longing rendered silent. "This is not their voice," Kratos said, teeth clenched. "This is manipulation." The custodian tilted her head. "Isn't all memory?" And then Kratos roared, not in fury but in clarity. He turned his back on the illusions, his blades burned brighter, his mind cleared if only for seconds. "They want to make us doubt ourselves," Vulkan grunted. "That only works if they understand what we are." And then, suddenly, they did. Because the choir, for all their falsehood, had become something else, adaptive. The cracks caused by the boys' rejection had taught them a new melody, not domination, reflection, and so the voices shifted again. This time, real memories played, not edited, not softened. Kratos saw himself, standing over a dying god, blood on his hands, his son's eyes wide in horror. Vulkan saw the drop site massacre, his children broken, betrayed, his oaths shattered in orbit. The boy saw nothing, because his memories were incomplete, and in that blankness the choir began to build him one. "We'll give you a history," they whispered. "We'll give you a place." Kratos stepped forward, rage building. "No, he chooses his place." Vulkan's voice joined his, like tectonic plates grinding into chorus. "You want obedience, but we give you defiance." The custodian's expression darkened. "Defiance is a phase. The galaxy moves towards structure, towards symphony," and then she raised her hand, and they came. Not illusions, not voices. Wretches. Dozens, no, hundreds of figures shambled from the dark. Some wore the scraps of once loyal regiments. Others bore twisted remnants of Mechanicus gear, all marked with choir glyphs carved into flesh. Servants not by domination, by choice. The custodian gestured. They moved. Kratos raised his blades. Vulkan's hammer roared to life with a gout of flame. The boy, still kneeling, blinked once, then twice, and stood. He did not scream. He did not glow. He simply walked forward into the oncoming tide. The first of the choir thralls reached him. He placed his palm on its face. And with a quiet whisper, unspoken and forgotten the instant it passed his lips, the thrall disintegrated. Not destroyed. Unwritten. The custodian froze. "What did he say?" Vulkan whispered. Kratos stared. "I don't know." The boy turned to them. "I remembered." And behind his eyes something shimmered. Not power, not fury. Origin. The choir recoiled. Their harmonics grew discordant, and then they screamed. Not sound, not pain. Erasure. The custodian turned to flee. But Kratos was faster. One blade wrapped her ankle, the other struck her shoulder, pinning her to the pylon. "You played with thought," he growled. "Let me show you what memory feels like." And he dragged her down. Vulkan turned to the boy. "What are you?" The boy blinked. "I don't know, but I know what I'm not." He looked to the choir, now crumbling, light bleeding from their forms like shattered sunglass. "I'm not them." The room trembled, not with collapse, with release. And in that silence, as the choir unraveled, as the custodian's form vanished into ash, Kratos, Vulkan, and the boy stood. Not victorious, just free for now. Terra was not quiet. It never had been. Even beneath the void black skies and thunderlit spires, the world hummed with its own sacred tension. A world stretched thin by the weight of divinity and the iron of bureaucracy. The void shields shimmered with the low murmur of distant bombardments held at bay. And the air itself was thick with incense, promethium fumes, and unspoken fear. And yet, beneath it all, something deeper stirred. Not in the palaces of the high lords or the vaulted cathedrals, where the ecclesiarchy wept to stone idols, but in the bones of the world, where the golden throne sat, and where the shadow of the emperor reached. Kratos stood still, the remnants of the choir's presence fading into the dust behind him. Every step forward felt heavier, not because of exhaustion, but because of expectation. This was not his world. He had no right to walk these halls, no rite of passage, no legacy carved into its foundation. And yet the doors opened for him, not with ceremony, not with light, but with recognition. Vulkan moved at his side, slower now, not due to wounds, but due to reverence. Even he, a Primarch, a son of the Emperor, did not tread lightly here. The boy followed behind them both, silent, his eyes scanning the walls, taking in the murals and reliefs carved in ages long past. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered longest on the depictions of sacrifice, of fire, of sons lost. They passed beneath vaults lined with the skulls of martyrs, past shattered banners of long-dead crusades, past servitors whose metal fingers still moved in prayer after 10,000 years, and then they reached the chamber. The first gate, not the golden throne itself, not yet, but the threshold from which none but the chosen may pass. And the custodes stood there, two, unmoving, radiant in gold, carved like statues but alive, weapons at rest but not relaxed. They looked upon Kratos first, eyes behind masks, judging, measuring. He did not flinch. Then they looked upon Vulkan, and for a heartbeat, one of them bowed, slight, barely perceptible, but there. The Primarch nodded. "Brother," he murmured, whether to the guard or to memory it was unclear. Then their eyes turned to the boy, and they did not look away. They did not attack, did not speak, but one took a step back, only one. The other held firm. That was enough. The gate opened. Kratos spoke without looking. "They fear him," Vulkan answered, voice low. "Not fear, uncertainty. What is he?" Vulkan's gaze never left the boy. "A question we may regret asking." They entered the chamber. It was a place older than time itself, it seemed. Here even the lights dared not flicker. Candles burned without flame. Gravity itself seemed hesitant, and at its end, distance impossible to measure, whether 10 feet or 10 miles, sat the golden throne. Not shining, not holy, enduring. A machine meant to contain divinity, or consume it, or perhaps both. Kratos felt his knees tremble but did not kneel. Vulkan dropped to one knee, head bowed. Not in worship, in recognition. And the boy? He walked, straight toward it, not fast, not arrogant, as if answering a call no one else could hear. The throne did not flare, did not react, but the air screamed, silent to the ears but loud in the blood. Kratos staggered, Vulkan clenched his fists, and the boy stopped, 10 paces from the foot of the throne. He raised a hand, no magic, no psychic push, just a hand, and in the space between his palm and the throne, a ripple, not visible, but real, a distortion of memory, of time. He saw himself, the boy, alone in a storm, a voice calling to him. And the voice sounded like his own. Kratos tried to step forward, but his foot wouldn't move. The throne was not guarding itself. Something else was. And then it happened. The light changed. Not from the throne, from the walls. Ancient pictoglyphs ignited. Runic inscriptions detailing battles, edicts, forgotten sacrifices lighting up in cascading pulses, a pattern, a response. Vulkan stood. "The throne, it remembers him," Kratos growled, "or it sees what he might become." And then the throne whispered. No words, no voice, but every soul present felt it. A name, not one known, but one remembered. The boy flinched. He did not speak it, but he knew it. Vulkan's voice cracked. "Is it giving him purpose?" Kratos stared hard. "Or claiming him?" The boy turned, eyes wide. "No," he whispered. "I chose this." And behind him the throne's light dimmed, not in rejection, in consent. The custodes outside did not speak as they passed, but their stances had changed. Respect, wariness, and for the first time uncertainty. What had been decided in that room? None of them knew, but the galaxy was no longer the same. And in the blackness of space above Terra, something began to stir. Not from warp, not from mechanicum, from elsewhere, from a place even the Emperor had dared not touch. Something had noticed, and it was coming. X, Ashes of Titans. Approximately 1,000 words. There were worlds where titans once walked, not the god machines of the Collegia Titanica. Those thunderous monstrosities still waged wars for the Imperium's glory. No, these were older, forgotten. Creatures of scale and myth, whose bones were star systems and whose breath seeded galaxies with ruin. And now echoes of them stirred once more. The stars above Segmentum Solar flickered, not with nova bursts or collapsing systems, but with motion, like something vast was adjusting its posture in the black. Not ships, not life forms, something in between, concepts given form. On Luna, the surface cracked, not from tectonics or bombardment, but because reality flinched. On Mars, the Omnissiah cultists screamed blasphemies into voxcasters before they turned to static. Their logic engines began to loop, not from error, but reverence. The machine spirit was overridden, and across Terra every astropath, bound, blinded, and chained in holy compliance, froze. The choir stopped mid-transmission. Some burst into flame, others collapsed into fetal positions, muttering names that never existed. Kratos felt it in his bones before he felt it in the warp. It was not a demon, nor a god, but it was coming. He stood atop the palace's outer spires now, high above the storms, above the banners, where lightning kissed the void. The boy was with him, silent, watching, and behind them Vulkan returned, his eyes narrowed. "We may not have long." Kratos didn't respond immediately. The air tasted wrong. The wind smelled like iron and ashes. "What did the throne tell him?" Kratos asked. Vulkan exhaled, steam rising from his nostrils. "It didn't tell him anything. It showed him what? Possibility." Kratos growled, tightening his grip on the blades of chaos. "I've seen what possibility does to men. It turns them into gods or corpses." The boy spoke then, his voice clear and distant, as if part of something larger. "It showed me what was waiting. What they buried before even time had language." Kratos turned. "What is it?" The boy looked at him, eyes no longer afraid. "A titan that devours other titans." And then they felt it. The ground of Terra shook, not from seismic force, but resonance. A call, a summoning. Vulkan's hand went to his hammer. "Something is coming through." Kratos glanced skyward and saw it, a tear in the stars. Not like warp rupture, no sorcery, no color, just absence. A vertical scar like a sword slash across the fabric of reality. Through it came a figure, not a demon, not an angel, but armor. Living jagged obsidian black armor, floating. And behind it, an aura of shattered constellations. A being shaped like a man but scaled like a god. Its face burned with indifference. A helmet fused into its head, eyes like galaxies collapsing. Its hands held nothing, yet bent the air as if gripping invisible blades. It spoke no words. But the air turned to frost, and every orbital sensor above Terra went blind. Vulkan stepped forward. "Kratos, this is not just a threat. This is judgment." Kratos cracked his neck, "Then let it judge." The boy raised his hand, and for the first time, the glyphs on his skin responded. Light flowed from his chest, out to his limbs, etching into the void the symbol of something older than Imperium, older than any chakra or psychic rune. It was not human. It was truth, and the entity paused, for a moment, then descended. The clash was not announced by war horns. There were no tactical formations, no salvos of Lascanon or orbital fire. Just motion. Vulkan leapt first, his hammer glowing with the fire of Nocturne, a star-forged weapon against an anti-star. Kratos followed, his chains singing, each link blazing with the fire of fury earned. And the boy, he did not fight, he observed, watching titans burn for him. watching what the Emperor could not stop, and knowing he would have to choose what he would become. The first blow shattered a plateau, the second split the clouds across Terra, and the third? The third shook the golden throne. There was no silence on Terra anymore. Every moment had a sound. Falling ash, burning sky, the rupturing groans of space itself where titans battled outside the reach of laws, physics, or gods. But beneath it all, beneath the thunder and the dying howls of orbital augurs, was the quietest thing of all, a choice. The boy stood at the edge of the world, not metaphorically, not in poetry, the edge, where what was met what could be. He looked down at the battlefield scorched into the skin of holy Terra. The Emperor's banners half-burnt, statues of custodians shattered, blood smeared across the sigils of 1,000,000 saints, and in the distance, two shapes still colliding. Kratos and the thing that was not a god. There was no name for it. Even now, the Mechanicus couldn't fabricate one. The Black Library might have a page that hinted, but none dared read it aloud. It was power, unaligned, unclaimed, older than the warp, more real than the materium, a being whose existence asked questions and whose breath crushed worlds that couldn't answer. Kratos fought it like only he could, not as a servant of a god, not as a pawn of a pantheon, but as a father, a killer, a soul who had stared at every kind of damnation and still refused to bow. And now he was losing, because even fury, even chaos, even love had limits, and this thing didn't. The boy stepped forward. The winds ignored him. They parted. They knew better. Behind him, a shape limped forward, Vulkan. His hammer cracked, armor blackened, molten blood dripping from his gauntlet. One eye ruined, the other burning. "You can't go alone," he rasped. "I'm not," the boy whispered. Vulkan looked around. There's no one else. But the boy only raised his palm, and from his palm came memory. Not power, not spell, but memory of who Kratos was, of what he'd done, of blades once bound to rage, now wielded for someone else. And suddenly, around the battlefield, across the broken spires of Terra, the chains moved. They slithered through the soil, through the air, through the fractured ley lines of Terra's ancient core. The blades of chaos returned, but they did not return to Kratos. They returned to the boy. Vulkan stepped back. "What are you?" The boy turned, the chains now coiled at his wrists, humming with all the wars they had survived. "I am the end of his rage," he said, "and the beginning of something else." He stepped off the edge and fell, but not downward, into the battle. The entity turned, mid-clash, and tilted its head, sensing something it could not calculate. The boy hit the earth, blades extended, and for the first time made the being flinch. Not from damage, but from something worse, uncertainty. Because for all its vastness, its boundless form, its ancient hunger, it could not see this child's future, and that made it vulnerable. Kratos saw it. In that moment, the thing hesitated, and he did not. He roared, not in words but in will. The blades returned to his hands from the boy's, reforged, remade, reborn. Together they struck, and the world split. Not physically, not violently, but quietly, like a chrysalis cracking open. The being shattered, not like glass, but like a mirror, into 1,000 shards of possibility. And where it had hovered, now hovered only light and silence. And when it cleared, Kratos was on his knees, his son beside him, and Terra still standing, barely. Vulkan approached limping, his hammer now just a handle. "What happens now?" he asked. Kratos looked up. His voice was hoarse. "We rebuild." But the boy turned, looking not at Terra, but past it. "There's more coming." Kratos closed his eyes. Always. They stood, 3 figures beneath a broken sky. The Emperor watched through 1,000 dead satellites, through burned cherub skulls and cracked vaults. He did not speak, but something changed. For the first time in 10,000 years, the golden throne hummed, not screamed, not groaned, hummed, and somewhere in the webway a gate unlocked. The boy turned toward it. Vulkan frowned. "You're leaving?" The boy nodded. "I have to know what else is out there." Before they get here first, Kratos said nothing, just stepped forward and put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then go," he said, "but don't forget who you are." And the boy walked into the light. The galaxy did not end that day, but something else did. The age of waiting, the age of stasis, and in its place, a war none were ready for, but all would join, because Titans never truly die. They just leave their weapons behind and hope someone strong enough finds them.